There it goes.
Well, welcome to M&A Conversations. This is a weekly webcast to the PCA. I'm your host, Chris Vogel, Director of NXTGEN Pastors, and I serve M&A as the Director of Ecosystem Development. Well, churches are beginning to open, and plans, they've been made and being put into place. Perhaps it is for your church a 50% capacity. It might be masked, outdoor services, considerations on how to celebrate the Lord's Supper. There's quite a list, and there is indeed a lot to think about. But as church leaders make plans for the saints to regather, there's a segment of the church that could easily be overlooked: our children. Social distancing and masks are problematic enough for adults, but how will our kids respond? Now, while for the shy child, social distancing may be a way of life, for so many children, running, hugging, laughing, crying is just part of being a kid. And following new rules in an old, familiar, friendly place is not easy. On our first forum we did several weeks ago about regathering, questions regarding infants and children quickly came up. We realized we need to dedicate time to children, so we're doing today, and to youth. We'll be doing that next week at the same time. It's been fascinating. We have indeed exceeded our Zoom license with this week. We have an opening for 500 and close to 600 have signed up. This is a vital topic. Be aware, this will be recorded and we'll be sending the link out on various platforms. And with us today are those who are not pundits. They are parish practitioners. They are those who are in the trenches and have been doing things like this. And so I'd like to introduce them to you. And so as I introduce, please, those of you on the screen, please wave. We have from Faith Presbyterian Church in Birmingham, Alabama, Steve Hood, who's the Director of Children's Ministry. Stephen. Along with him is Martin Wagner, the Executive Pastor of Faith as well. From Grace Peoria, Grace Presbyterian Church in Peoria, Illinois, we have Julie Cordis, the Director of Children and Family Ministries, along with Paul Utenage, the Executive Pastor. From down in San Antonio, Texas, Redeemer Presbyterian Church, Mark Beham, Pastor of Youth and Children's Ministries, along with the Executive Director of Operations, Jeremy Whitley. And from the DC area in Centerville, Virginia, Christ Central Presbyterian, Heidi Shu, who's the Children's Ministry Director, along with Sam Kim, the Executive Pastor. And of course, last but not least, we have Stephen Estock, the Coordinator of the Committee on Discipleship Ministries, CDM, along with Sue Jakes, who is with CDM, the Children's Ministry Coordinator. Well, we are certainly all glad that you're here with us today, and for you, the audience that are signing in, we want to be able to hear from you. And so you will see opportunities. We want to, well, let me just say, I'm going to get the ball rolling with a few questions to start, but we want to hear from you. And so I'm a facilitator, and all y'all are much more smart in these areas than I. So we're going to be looking for questions that you're going to have. You'll see at the bottom of the screen a Q&A box. I'm sure by now you're well used to Zoom and you're familiar with the chat box. You can use that if you like, but it really is a lot more helpful using the Q&A box. And we're all going to be keeping our eye on it. If you're joining us with the on Facebook Live, I'm not going to be able to follow any of the chat there, so I apologize for that. This, as I said, events being recorded. When we're all done, I'll be loading it, editing it, and loading it to YouTube. And if you've registered and you're here, you'll be getting an email with the link for the site. Feel free to share it. We'll be posting it on the M&A page, and I believe Stephen on the CDM page as well. And any of the materials we're going to talk about that I get from our panel, I'll be including those too. If you don't get anything, first, as always, check your spam folder. That's where most of my email to people seems to go. But otherwise, you feel free by Saturday to email me, and I can send it out in case something got lost. Well, with all that said, let's get underway. And well, Stephen, as coordinator of CDM, just give us a brief update of how CDM has been engaging, especially with regard to the children's ministries. What's been happening on your end of it?
Well, what we've been seeing as we go through this time that so many people are just wondering what's going on is we're just trying to remain faithful to our mission as the Committee on Discipleship for the General Assembly. What we like to say is our calling, our mission is to strengthen the church by providing leaders with the relationships and resources they need for discipleship ministry, or what we like to say is connecting people to people and people to resources. So this has been a great opportunity for us to realize that we're not experts, but we see what's happening around the denomination, and so we try to connect people. So what we're trying to do with that is, particularly through our Facebook page, and Sue Jace can speak more to that, our Connect PCA Children's Ministry, trying to bring people together. One of the things that I observed as I look at that is our children's ministry page is always very practical. Somebody will say, hey, I have this need, how do I fix it? Or here's something I found that will be helpful. And again, Sue can speak more to that than I can. But then we're also, as we're thinking not only now, but also in the future, is how do we begin to develop more digital resources that can be used by churches, and particularly in smaller groups. So we're finding that how do we begin to use video? How do we use digital downloads, that type of thing, and scalable resources where you might be thinking a small group of 10 to 20, but how do you begin to think about multiple small groups with that? How do you keep them together? So that's what we're trying to do. And then as we look to the future, we see that this is going to be a real change in how we look at ministry, particularly resources. And it's not that we produce them all ourselves. Many times we just connect and point to other resources that are available that are very helpful and trustworthy for PCA churches.
Thank you. For each of you, maybe just I quickly introduced you. Tell us again who you are, where you're at, the context, your church, what are some of the plans you have. I think only one of you have actually started worship, and that was last week. And so I pronounced them the experts on the panel because you've done it. But no, if you would just kind of share a little bit about what's happening and specifically with regard to children, what are you doing as you begin to regather? Whoever would like to go first, jump on in. Or I can call on you.
We're here at Peoria, Illinois at Grace Presbyterian Church. I'm going to let Julie introduce herself first.
I'm Julie Cordis, the children's director.
And I'm Paul Utenage. I'm the executive pastor. Julie's been here much longer than I have. I've been here a couple of years now. Basically, I've been involved in a number of churches before that in student ministry, a senior pastor, and then I found this executive pastor role that I just love. Julie, you've been here how long?
My entire life. We won't say how many years that is.
So it's only 21 years. Yeah. And you've been involved with the children's ministry for a long time, although you've been the director since.
Yeah, I've been 3.5 years as a children's director this time around, but I've been involved in children's ministry my entire life, so different roles.
So the basic things of where we're at right now, because Illinois is not opened by the executive order, we're still in an early phase of our state's plan, which means the main things that we've been doing are areas involved with family ministry, emphasis by video, et cetera, a lot of phone calling. You want to describe real fast?
The chat with Miss Julie thing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. I've been doing chat with Miss Julie. I'll probably get into that more as we answer other questions. I think we're supposed to answer how many people we're serving. So there's 2,000 probably we're counting as we're serving in the church. I minister to probably about 650 kids. They don't all come at one time, thankfully, but that's how many I minister to.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, we'll jump in. This is Jeremy Whitley. I'm the Executive Director of Operations here at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in San Antonio, Texas, the cradle of American liberty, I might add. And with me is Assistant Pastor Matt Beham. He is, well, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, Matt Beham. I'm the Assistant Pastor of Youth and Children Ministry here at Redeemer, and been here about 12 years in some capacity, but only about 2 years over the children and nursery, as well as the youth ministry.
Our plan is to resume worship for the first time gathered together this Sunday, May 31st. And that is in the context, broader context of our governor having begun a rollout of the state of Texas. At the beginning of May, we started a 25% occupancy requirement. In mid-May, it moved to 50% for basically all retail businesses. Thankfully, skating rinks are now open as well. All of those things are coming slowly but surely. But for the interesting thing about our context is that early on, our governor made it very clear that his assessment of the situation is that the church is protected by the Constitution and did not want to get into our business all that much. And so he provided guidance on how he would recommend going about doing worship. But in the state of Texas, there are churches who have been worshiping full on now for many weeks with basically just as if it had happened before the pandemic began. And so we're navigating that context. And so as we approached how we wanted to come back together, regather for worship, we actually pivoted from the governor's guidance, which was a 40% capacity recommendation. Every other row would be empty, spacing between people, masks, things like that, all those suggestions. And so we actually incorporated as a session all of those things into our plan as we began to gather for worship, which we actually have a document that we shared. It's a regathering for worship document that we have sent to everyone in our congregation, which I think Chris will make available at some point later during this. And then, as a part of that, we looked at every facet of our membership up into including our children. And that's how we started thinking about, basically everything that we came up with. We did not identify children specifically. We just, talked about, all right, what is it going to look like for our kids' ministries? What is it going to look like for our usual time together on a Sunday morning, and how are we going to adapt?
Yeah, and so, on any given Sunday, there are three specific ways that children's ministry will meet. One is Nursery, right? So Nursery, Children's Church, which is what we call training the pews. That's during the sermon. And then Sunday School, or what we call CE. And we've just decided that because it would be very hard to have our children socially distance, that we have canceled each one of those programming events for the time being. And as well as asking our adults to wear masks, or requiring our adults to wear masks. Any child over the age of 10 years old is also required to wear masks. That's per the governor's recommendations for us. So that's how we're moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Steve Hood, and I am at Faith Presbyterian Church in Birmingham, Alabama. We actually started meeting last week for gathering for worship. But like Jeremy, we are not at this moment doing any children's ministries, in-person children's ministries, no nursery, no Sunday school. And then we have tentative plans to have some children's programming during the summer that will be all outside, keeping them in small groups, groups of 10 or less. And then we're holding with an open hand, realizing that Alabama right now is in the midst of since everything is reopened, we're in a bit of a spike in cases. And we kind of need to monitor how that goes and how our people respond to that. But Martin can probably speak more to our reopening as far as worship goes.
Yeah, Martin Wagner, executive pastor at Faith. Like Steve said, we had our first in-person worship service last Sunday, 3 different services, and we thought that went really smoothly. Being Memorial Day weekend, it was a smaller crowd, so much more manageable, but this week will be a challenge to make sure that our plan is in place. But what we've done in terms of just planning, Steve mentioned it, is that we really have about a 3 to 4 week horizon. So we've made a commitment for 4 weeks to do this for worship, and we're kind of what used to be long-range planning was 2 to 3 years. Now long-range planning seems like it's 3 months, and a planning is now 2 to 3 weeks. So that's the horizon. It's really shortened for us, and we're keeping an eye on it and trying to stay flexible in terms of what programming will look like, and not planning too far out just because things are changing so consistently.
Mm-hmm. Good. All right. And Sam and
Chris.
Heidi, I think.
Yes. Hi, Chris. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Kim. I serve as the executive pastor at Christ Central Presbyterian Church. We're located in Centerville, Virginia. Just for a point of reference, about 30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., in the northern suburbs of Virginia. We have not started to regather and reconvene to the congregation. We're still in an online streaming status as a church, because our governor actually has allowing the northern part of Virginia. Actually, there was a little bit of a distinction between the northern part and the southern and the rest of the state of Virginia. We enter phase 1 beginning this weekend. So the earliest we could even consider phase 1 was this last weekend of May. And we're about to roll out to our church through a town hall format in early June what our phase 1 will look like in the subsequent weeks. And we are constantly monitoring because, again, we're probably maybe 2 to 3 weeks behind the rest of the country where they have already entered phase 1 or 2. We are just entering phase 1. So when I introduce Director Heidi, our children's ministry director, she can speak to what we have done and then also the plans, especially as we're considering phase 1 and 2. But just briefly, our context is we're in the DC metro area. We call it the DMV, not the Division of Motor Vehicles, but the DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So we straddle three major, 2 states and 1 district. So we actually have to navigate 3 states, the mayor of DC and the governors of Maryland and Virginia, because our congregation and work in all 3 areas. So it's a little bit trickier for us in that regard. Another thing that makes our context a little bit unique is we share a campus with our former mother church, a Korean immigrant church, now our big sister church. We are 2 particularized PCA churches sharing the same campus. And we have to also coordinate carefully. I don't know if there's others on this call who are sharing campuses with another congregation, but we have to also have a very concerted, coordinated, cohesive plan so that one congregation is not moving that much further ahead of the other. So that's something that we are working on as we speak. And so we are, again, probably about 2 to 4 weeks behind most of the churches, at least on this call, and maybe many in the audience. And I'll turn it over to Director Heidi to introduce herself in the ministry.
Hi, I'm so glad to be a part of this. Actually, I was saying that I'm here just to learn from everybody else. So just to give you guys a heads up about that. I have been at Christ Central for 4 years doing children's ministry, and it's been such a blessing. We have about 150 children coming in every week. We have 2 services, so that kind of gives you a little bit of context what it used to be. But right now, with what is happening and what's been allowed with phase 1, as Pastor Sam has said, we have not been able to resume, obviously, the norm, what was the norm. We are still online, virtual, and as of now, we don't plan to go actually have the kids have their children's service, have their Sunday school classes, for a few phases in our minds now. We're going to try to transition them in slowly, as I can say. So that's kind of our context right now.
If I could add one last comment, Chris, is one of the things I think that has worked really well in this status is Director Heidi has been giving a children's Bible lesson every Sunday from the platform. Okay. So recognizing that it is a multi-generational audience, we have shared our Sunday service with our director of children's ministry. So every Sunday she's done some tremendous gospel lessons, Bible lessons. And so the whole family is actually getting teaching from both Director Heidi and our senior pastor.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So you all have a sense then of where our panel is at. Sue, I was wondering if you could speak to things that, as you've been hearing and seeing and knowing, especially for those directors who are perhaps volunteers, smaller church, along those lines. What have you seen and heard that's happening there? You'll need to unmute.
I've been talking to a lot of children's directors from a lot of different churches in areas of the country, and there are some things that are really consistent. One is most parents are not ready to drop their kids off at a nursery or in a children's Sunday school class or send them to children's church. And so when you talk about gathering back together, the parents are going to be there. If they come, they will be bringing their children with them. And I'm also the director of children's ministry at Westminster Church in Atlanta. We will be regathering on June the 7th. And this weekend, all the officers and staff, which also includes some of our families with young children, we're going to do a practice run. It's one of the things we found being in a very full sanctuary every Sunday and having 2 services and a lot of younger children in the mix, is that to safely distance, we are going to have a family fellowship room, our fellowship hall. We are setting up round tables, and families will actually register to come, and they'll all have their own table. We will have things there like, help worshiping children to worship with children's bulletins and other things there at every table. And they will be directed in a completely different door into that room where they will be live streamed the service. But another fun thing about it is around the edge of that room will be the walking in of all of the people that will be seated in the sanctuary, which our families are excited about because they feel like they'll get to see a lot of people as they gather in their little tables. But we're, like I said, we're going to practice that this week. And as I look at some of the questions that you all are asking, the older adults, we have a very large older adult population, and we're telling them that the families with young children will be in another room, and that I'm doing a video for our families for the children, where I'm going to be talking to children about how when they come to church, they're not going to be able to run out one door and to the playground and away from their parents and go to the rooms that they're used to going to. And the reason is that we have a lot of older people in our church who are very frightened that if they get this virus, they will become very, very sick. And they don't want to have to be worried the whole time they're there that someone is going to come up to them who might not know that they're sick. And a lot of times children have the virus and they're not sick at all. So I'm working on that because our parents were saying, help us get our children to the place where they can come in to the church and know that things are different. I think we're going to even video the room as we practice on Saturday so that we can show the families exactly what that will look like when they get there, to sort of prepare the children for that. Meanwhile, we do weekly Sunday school lessons. We have weekly devotions for parents, and we're running a Pray For Me campaign at our church right now that interacts all of the older and every generation of adults with the children in the church. That was something we had planned to start before this happened, but it's been a really great connecting ministry for us through all this. Someone asked the questions, just the needs and opportunities of families with young children, as we meet, all of this. So a lot of those things are going on. In the smallest of church, I think the key thing is that you survey your parents. Then you say, what are you comfortable with as far as leaving your children? I have been meeting in a church plant in South Atlanta that started to come back together 3 weeks ago. And they have a young couple and an older adult who have said, we'll wear masks and we'll keep any children of these young parents who want to come in and worship without them. It's amazing how few of them are. And what the parents were saying is all of this practice at home worship, live streaming our service, and sitting with our 2-year-old in our lap and our 3-year-old next to us, and working through the sermon with them and keeping them engaged as we practice worship at home, they want to stay. And I thought, well, great. That's one of those things I think we can chalk up to sort of a new way to train children into worship. It's practice, the live stream at home in your living room. And so a lot of them are not doing it. But the ones who do, they have masks, they're wiping everything, spraying their hands, everything before they go in. And it's a smaller church and they're comfortable with that. I think the key thing is communicating and making sure that you're doing what will make the person who is maybe most anxious very comfortable with the children. But if anyone can come up with the way to social distance toddlers and preschoolers, I have thousands of churches that are waiting to hear that story.
Yes, exactly. That's going to be the challenge. I'm seeing it's been tough enough convincing adult members of what that means. Children, it's its own challenge. Well, we have a number of questions coming in. And so let me just go through those. And if any of the panelists see any of those questions you're interested in, please just get my attention. Someone had asked here, Elizabeth did, I would love to hear more about what gospel lessons during the live stream look like. And I think Heidi, you're doing that at Christ Central. Describe that.
Yes, well, we had children's lessons already as part of our norm back then. It was always going to be, we believe in family worship, so we want to make sure that our kids are part of that at least once a month. So we are already used to having a children's lesson within our main service. And I don't know if that's what Elizabeth was referring to, whether it's a part of the family worship, but that is where we do our now gospel lessons every single week, every Sunday, because we're now live streaming. And then whether the parents like it or not, they're going to get a children's lesson too, which I think is good. So the gospel lessons during that time, it's really just 5 minutes. It's addressing the children, but allowing them to be, it makes them feel a part of the worship in their homes. And that's what we want this to be, especially during this pandemic. I'm realizing the families are kind of place where they are having to enjoy their family worship time. It's like a forced family worship time. I don't want to say forced, but it is a designated time that they're having together with their parents, worshiping together, listening to God's word together. And so what an opportunity, right? And because of that, we keep the lesson short. I try my best to connect it with the adult message as well. So there's some kind of link there, especially for those who are older. They can listen to both and feel like it's related. And we actually kind of follow along with our curriculum as well. So then that week, what I will do is I will send out, and we've done this actually as an education ministry as a whole, we send out just one email, because I know everybody, we said we cannot bombard them with emails. We've consolidated all of our emails to one, where all of our students from the youngest to college are getting their Bible study weekly material. And that way it's accessible, and it's given to them before the Sunday worship and messages come. That way they have the material ready. The parents can copy it or print it out, and then while the message is going, the children's lesson is going, they can listen to it. And while the adults are listening to their message, the children can have their materials ready to just, it's like supplementing what they just heard and validating what they just heard, and then contextualizing it to them, the application for them. So hopefully that flow has helped them be a part of the worship, as well as listening to their own, portion of the service. So that's how we've been doing it.
With the supplemental material, Heidi, is that material you purchase, bring in, or you develop it yourself?
For us, we use a curriculum, and so it is material that is accessible to the parents, and then they just have to print it out and have it ready for them.
But you're getting it from an outside source, I take it.
Yes, outside source. Yes.
And so, Stephen, is that something that CDM has available for churches that might be looking? I think many of our churches will continue doing some live streaming because the integration is not going to happen overnight. So if you have families at home, is there material that CDM has that could be used for that?
Why don't you answer that, because you also know about what's happening with GCP. Oh, Sue?
Yes. Oh, with me. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, you can get every lesson all the way through spring, and starting in 2 weeks, beginning through the summer, from Great Commission Publications. They are using the preschool because it has more activity papers and guidelines for parents to talk about the lesson in our preschool program. But it also has a video. B.A. Snyder, who's done children's ministry for years, does a short lesson for the kids. And so you can show that, and you can give GCP the email of every one of the parents in your church, and they can send it to them individually. There will be a link sent to you. I've already sent it to Chris, and he will send that to you at the end of this. And there is also along with that video, a place where you can order the papers at a very inexpensive way. And if your church has already purchased it, they will send you those for free. And there's a lot of things digitally with that to download. So you can do a Sunday school lesson with your kids every week and at very little cost. I like to have the lesson sent to me, and then I send it personally to all of my families with a little bit of an intro and some ideas attached to that they might want to do to continue on the topic and the theme of that lesson. It's a little bit of personal contact for me. And every now and then, just to compete with B.A. Snyder, I make my own video.
Okay.
Yeah, can I just piggyback on that real quick? We're very thankful to Sue for working with us. We've used the CDM's Teach Me to Worship curriculum in our children's church for a long time, and yeah, we love it. And so we've kind of talked to her, and so we're using that now and sending that out. There's a great letter to parents about what you learn each month, and so we're just continuing that by making that available on a PDF format to our parents in a weekly email. So.
Yeah, another thing we have going is we have a digital resource, Little Pillars, and we've got that available also, similar to the Teach Me to Worship, but that looks at the Apostles' Creed, Lord's Prayer, and help me, Sue, what's the
Commandments.
Ten Commandments, yes.
And you can send that to your parents, and they can download all of the activities and the lesson itself digitally. And this is one of the things when the question comes up, how are things going to change because of COVID-19? I think that we are seeing that people really want that more and more, and we're hoping that more of the resources that we produce at least will be very open to that. When Matt's children's director called in and said, hey, can we send these to our parents? I said, yes, you own it. Once you download Teach Me to Worship, and then you have all those digital lessons that you can just send home to your parents. Did you know that, Steve Hood?
Good.
Resource. I'll put that on the answer line as well.
Great. What are you finding as far as how the children are responding? I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Any of the anxiety, the fears, but then also, are you finding yourself having to respond to the parents of the children and their anxiety and fears? Perhaps something that may or may not have been part of your job description before this. You're finding it is for the director of children's ministries. How are you addressing some of those things for the kids as we go through this ongoing transition?
I was actually very overwhelmed at first with how many people reached out that usually don't reach out to me to say, hey, I'm discouraged, I'm nervous, I'm scared, and things. So I was actually overwhelmed because my job description did change. I used to focus all on the programs and the events and all those little details, and all of a sudden now, I was helping families. I loved it. I love it. It's fun. So I set up a chat with Miss Julie, and at first it was supposed to just be for me to be able to connect with the kids and to help the kids through, answer questions, or just encourage them or play with them, through Zoom. And then I started having moms sign up for a chat with Miss Julie. And they just wanted to, some cried, some talked, some vented. And so it actually ended up that. And then I've had some volunteers sign up to do that. So that was one I wasn't expecting actually. But it's been fun because I love to connect with people.
Well, jumping in on that, I think one of the most interesting challenges during this pandemic has been just that it's not just that church is upended, it's all of life has been upended. Graduations aren't happening. Kids aren't going to school anymore if they were going to school before. And so I think one of the keys to helping the kids navigate it, at least for our church, has been also working with the parents directly. So our pastors especially and our ruling elders have been, pretty engaged in reaching out to people. Our senior pastor makes a dozen or more phone calls a day, getting a hold of basically all of our families as we go through. And I mean, that's, 900 members strong. And so Matt, our youth and children's pastor, does a wonderful job of connecting with our parents as well as the youth and helping them to understand, that we're all moving in this together, and Jesus is still who Jesus was before the pandemic, and he will be long after the pandemic, and then continuing to navigate those things. And then also being attentive to, as little things pop up, being on top of each other for 24 hours a day for 6 weeks straight, that poses unique challenges, and helping people bear with those. Also to remember that they're not the only ones experiencing that. They're not crazy for thinking that's not the most fun thing in the world, and just trying to help them do that. But also being very careful not to increase anxiety as we turn to coming back to worship. I think one of the unique challenges of our roles as ministry leaders, and anyone who's in a ministry leadership perspective, is to not heap burdens on people as we try to plan how we're going to come back into a worship setting, and knowing that it's not going to look exactly the way that it was before, and also knowing that people, no matter what we do to prepare our churches for returning, will not feel comfortable coming back, and letting them know that that's okay. That we're not going to place on them a spiritual burden that increases the anxiety, that says, well, you really should be trying better, or we've made it as safe as we can, there's no reason for you not to come back. And making sure to be careful not to increase it even as we turn to coming back to worship.
Yeah, just anecdotally on that, we receive a lot of communications from, I've personally received a few communications from parents who said, your plan is awesome. Like, y'all have really thought through how you're going to reintegrate. This is wonderful. But we ain't coming back, and in other words, they're saying, hey, you can do everything that you could possibly do, and yet we're just still not comfortable. And so, like, as Jeremy said, just providing space for that and saying, okay, like, this is, we just need to be okay with that.
One of the questions that has been asked is, how do you know when you're preparing all of these lessons and the ideas for parents? I've done everything from video challenges where they had to do a scavenger hunt, and just things to keep the kids engaged. And a lot of families responded at first, and then it became lower and lower and lower. And it's a lot of work. Children's ministry directors are finding it's a lot of work to keep sending out curriculum and engaging parents and trying to network with them and make sure that they are engaged. And what we're hearing again across the line is a lot of parents are now saying to us, leave us alone, go away, we're tired. We've had these kids at home with us and you've given us so much to do. We don't want anything else to do. And I've been trying to find out, do you want to do, a summer program, a special reading idea, or some backyard Bible clubs, or and they're very exhausted, having their kids come back home and then finishing school at home and all of those things. And so I really like to have a dialogue and encourage everyone, and how we can grant parents some rest and children some creative play this summer, with a gospel emphasis. And I've been thinking through that a lot, because I do think that the more and more we've done, the tireder and tireder parents have gotten. I'm feeling that in most of my children's churches. Some of the questions here have illustrated that. Do you even know that? How do you find out if your parents are even using this? Well, some of them, if I forget and I send it a day late, actually say, what happened to our lesson? I go, whoo, and then I kind of know who's doing it. But a whole lot of them are, I'm convinced, not even opening those emails any longer. So there are new questions to be asked there, I think, as to how we build the context of the body of Christ, so coming alongside of our children. And one of the things that I'm really trying to do is to get the families and the older adults in our church, as we regather, to realize that church is going to be more different for children than it is anybody else. And not only have them praying for these families and these kids, but if we can find a way, socially distanced, for them to speak to those children and to say hello to them and we miss you, and to do some good interaction when they are there. I've thought about opening our playground, just to 2 families at a time, while they're there, just to make it a positive experience, because it is going to be challenging. There's just so much to think about. And I think my mantra for 2020 is simply, I don't know. But I think that I really appreciate leaders of the church like you all coming together and to pray for our children as they come back, that this is something that they remember with great fondness. oh, I remember worshiping at home with my parents, and now I'm getting to go back and see people that I didn't see before. And, you know, how do we, the body of Christ is what we're trying to share with them. It's part of, this is the real method of the gospel, Jesus with us. So I'm open.
Yeah.
So anybody else on the panel have ideas regarding this?
Yeah,
It's interesting. We found in our conversations here at Grace that we're seeing the same thing, that people really are busy. So we purposely said we're not going to try to replace everything virtually, and even with the social distancing, we're trying to focus and think about what are the most essential pieces. And we've even had a conversation about what will we reset for the future in order to be able to say, let's use this as a window of opportunity to actually be stronger when we come back. And that strength at times, we've talked about that strength at times may actually be not doing as many things. We're normally, before all this, the building is used like crazy. And we got just so many people coming in and out. But we're actually trying to think through what kinds of things are the most essential for discipleship, for making disciples, so that we're really able to focus better. And Julie, with the children's part, is a large part of that for us. So we're having the same thing as you.
Yeah, I started out giving parents all kinds of fun stuff to do, devotionals, lots of things. And they were like, we can't do this. E-learning, that's all we can focus on is the e-learning. So I stepped way back. I didn't even do anything. People would ask me, what are you doing? And I said, I'm doing nothing. I'm giving my parents space. And they actually appreciated that. And I focused only on our Sunday morning lesson. So that was, the one thing that I was focused on, and they were able to handle that. And so a lot of people have done that. Now that school's over, though, I'm starting to have more things available, different activities and things like that. So, parents are very overwhelmed.
Yeah, I would just add. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just kind of summarizing a little bit what I'm hearing. I was hearing from Jeremy as well. One, giving permission to families about reentry, giving them a space, letting them set when they're comfortable, but then also giving the parents permission that they don't have to now take on far more, too much, too fast, that it wears them out, but giving them the opportunity to breathe and saying there's material. If you want it, if you're looking for something, here it is, but don't feel like we got to fill every gap. So, yeah, Steve, you were going to say, I think.
I was going to say, when this started, I think my impulse was to just send resources and overwhelm with options for parents to do. And as they were getting overwhelmed with schooling at home, I think that was the message that we got, was that's been enough. And so even, I think under, Martin's instruction to us or encouragement for us has been to emphasize connection over content. Not that content is not important. Of course, content is very important, but our kids need connection. And so, we tried to provide opportunities for them to connect online with their Sunday school classes. And even as we plan for the summer, there's an emphasis on activity and fellowship and over content. So again, not that content's not important, but right now I think our kids, everybody needs to feel connection, and so do our kids. And just to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
I think
Steve, on that, I would like for you guys to speak to what are you doing this summer? You mentioned it, because the question has come up here about, what are we doing about summer ministry? VBS in most places is a wash.
Yeah.
But you mentioned y'all had a plan. What's your plan?
A tentative plan. How about that?
Okay. Everything tentative.
Yeah. Our idea is to provide an outdoor activity where they come in groups. They would have to register ahead of time. Everything would be outside. We would have 3 activity stations, 10 kids at an activity station. After 20 minutes, we switch activities, and after an hour, we give them a snack and they go home. Next group comes in, and so we would have 2 sessions. And it's fun stuff. It's making paper airplanes. It's doing arts and crafts. It's obstacle courses where they're not touching things. But the emphasis on, we always do an art and science camp instead of VBS, and so most of our activities are either art-based, science-based, and then something active. but just to give something for kids to do, to have something for parents. And we're also asking parents, this is not a thing where a parent comes and drops them off. The parent comes with the child, their children, and the parents help us with the social distancing. So that's our tentative plan.
Right.
Yep.
We are having VBS this summer. Go ahead.
No, please.
We are having VBS this summer, not at all what it used to look like. We used to have about 800 kids in the building and 400 volunteers all in one building. But this year we're going to do a block party VBS, and we'll have church members sign up to be a host home. And the kids who sign up will be assigned to a host home, and we'll have kind of like the backyard Bible club type thing, but it will be for VBS. And so I'm actually, the registration's been open for a week, and I'm actually very happy with the registration. We have about half from Grace, half not. We have about 10 people actually don't attend any church. So I'm very excited with the feedback I've gotten. Host families are excited about having the opportunity to connect with families in their neighborhood. So I'm excited about this. I wasn't at first because we've been doing VBS the old way all my entire life, but the more I've gotten to this, I'm actually very excited.
Right. Let's talk some more.
Yeah.
All right.
What other things that you had never thought of doing before that you're either looking at or considering or doing that you see some fruitfulness in it?
One of the ideas that talking about all of that, I'm just trying to take all of it in because I completely understand the same things are happening on our side. Our parents, I was so excited. I guess this is like confessions of a children's ministry director, but we're like, yes, now they're going to be discipling their children in their homes like we've always wanted, and we got so excited. I got so excited. And of course, again, like you guys sending out all the resources, but this has really changed my outlook on the opportunity. I think it went from the opportunity for the parents to disciple to an opportunity for us to serve our parents. And I realized, and I got convicted of how I thought was connection with the parents, how it can even grow. And so it has really gone from, the family education, our education pastor and I have talked about this, and we want to call them individually and just get connected with them first. A few of them that have mentioned, I've talked to, have said these words: I feel so guilty. Like guilt is on their shoulders because they're not getting their kids to even do their schoolwork. They don't know how to do that, and then on top of that, they want to disciple their children, but it's kind of fallen to the wayside, right? So, so with that, what I once was tempted to say, children's ministry is not a babysitting service. It's not that. Like, it's gone from that to how can we serve you as the parent? How can we, as children's ministry, come alongside you and support you? And so I have actually had to have a shift of thinking and heart about, maybe I have to think about opportunities for the kids where we do take them off the parents' plate for a little bit, give them time to connect somehow, even if it's only for, 45 to an hour, where they're just connecting with somebody else, so that they can have some time to breathe, time to do some cooking that they're normally doing now, lots of, just something that will help the parents to kind of take a breath, So with that, and now that we're kind of moving into the summer months, I'm trying, because we're trying, one of the core values that we have at our church is to be a connected church, which means trying to connect all the different generations. So one idea is, they're looking for, in place of camps, they're trying to look at what can my child do, right? So I'm trying to maybe coordinate with either our youth group director, our college ministry pastor, how they can bring on, and using their gifts, maybe do like an art class with our kids, so they're set aside, like this week, if you want to sign up for art classes, Miss Diane's going to be doing classes with you here, and your registering fits in there. And some other, there's right now a coding class that one of our youth directors, actually planning right now with just the youth kids. But I did talk to her and say, hey, I know a lot of kids who would love that class, So even adding that kind of class in the summer. So yes, it's still virtual, but it's allowing connections with somebody at the church too, that maybe they don't get to really connect with. And there is this serving of one another within the body. And then I'm really gaining a lot of information about how to do, I don't know how to tentatively do this, but yes, gathering families together and then maybe doing kind of like stations, like, someone had said about stations, but moving them along those stations and doing like a prayer station. So each time it's praying for each other, as well as doing something fun at those stations. And so this is really definitely taking us out of our comfort zones, right? Thinking outside of the box a little, but yeah, looking at all the opportunities that are available.
Could I just add, Chris, and this is more of a principle than it is a program that I'd like to just share. And we just came out of a planning time with our staff this past week for next year, tentatively, of course. And one thing I want to share, I shared with our staff, and I hope to share with all those listening, you are released from trying to do what other churches are doing.
Mm-hmm.
There are best practices, there are lessons learned, but you do your church as God has called you to do your church. And that, I think, it has to go to the parents, but also it has to go to the staff and the volunteers. Again, the church across the street, they may be called to do several of the things that we suggested, but that's their church and they're being faithful to their church. We have to be faithful to our church with our resources, with our context. So I think there's a danger because it's so virtual. Mm-hmm. It's easy to see what other churches are doing and feel like we're behind. And I think oftentimes guilt is usually a relative term. I'm guilty compared to. And we don't want anyone on our staff, but especially those who work with kids, to feel any guilt, because I don't believe God is viewing our churches based on how we're doing compared to the church across the street around the world within our denomination. How can we be faithful with the resources, the context, and the challenges that we're facing? And I really want to release the staff as we're planning for next year and even for the summer. Maybe it's programming less. Maybe it's a different version of VBS, but not to feel like it's less than or not living up to. And hopefully that principle is something we can reinforce, and also just preaching the gospel to our parents, to our children, to our leaders, that you're not defined by what you produce at the end of this summer. You're defined by what Christ has done for you. So it's just another way of just reinforcing and preaching the gospel to them. And hopefully they are being renewed in the gospel as they're freed from, again, a more performance-based faith that a lot of people in ministry, especially children and youth ministry, we fall into that now.
Oh, that's such an important word, because if there's anything we're going to leave people at the end of all of this, it's not about just producing more, doing more, but it is that life reliant on Christ and answering to Him. That's very helpful. No, thank you.
Just to round out our summer plans, I know that we're doing something very similar to Julie in Illinois. Is we're doing a backyard Bible club as well. And just a couple of things that the way that we're thinking about organizing it is we have community groups. And so we're kind of putting a community group or two together. And so that helps us to organize it through an already kind of organic connections or group of people who, let's face it, probably are not social distancing. Like if you're going to hang out with someone, you're going to hang out with your community group first. And then having 30 kids or less in each one of those groups for each house. And then we're staffing those backyard Bible clubs with a lot of our older youth ministry students. So those are just the ways that we're thinking about from a very practical and organizational standpoint, our backyard Bible clubs.
I don't know if there's any specific or different considerations or markers that you're thinking of when it comes to nursery. Has that been discussed on any of your church staffs as distinct from specific children's ministries? That as you begin to open up the church, lower numbers and that, when will you decide what are the markers, the benchmarks for something like nursery?
I've been thinking about that question, as I've seen it come up now a few times on when we would do Sunday school or children's church or even nursery for that matter as we begin to come back. And I can't say that we have a specific checklist of either metrics or anything, but I think we would probably take the same approach that we're taking on all of this, which is we're going to follow the guidance from our local and state government as they begin to navigate opening up more things and bringing people in greater contact, and then seeing what the results of that are. We are doing our best to not be on the bleeding edge of trying to push the envelope of gathering together again. And I think there's some wisdom there, hopefully. But I think it's going to be, just the way that we've been talking about this in general has been, how comfortable is our session with that? How comfortable are our staff and our volunteers with that? How comfortable would our congregation be joining back together, coming to take advantage of that? And then the staff for those, we have a mix of staff and contractors who perform those jobs. How comfortable would they be coming back into that? And then we would probably start coming to a volume question of, all right, when is it practical and makes sense for us to do that? When would more than 3 people take advantage of the nursery again? So all of those things I think would come into play. I wish there was one answer, but as Sue said, it's her new mantra, I don't know. But we'll continue to think and pray and evaluate and hope that things become more clear, as we test into this. Each week we're going to get more information. We're in a situation where 50% of our congregation, we're only allowing at most 50% of our congregation to come on a Sunday. So the next Sunday, the other 50% will be coming in. And so the first couple of weeks, first month, we're going to be learning a lot and filling in a ton of data, hopefully learning on how we can best serve our all of our families, all of the people coming into the church, but then also eventually turning toward what does it look like for children's ministries to resume.
Definitely have all of those same questions. Everything is a question now. Illinois is not going to open up to have children anyway for another little bit. So I've been kind of delaying thinking too deeply. But as I do think about it, parents want 2 things for their kids. They want safety and they want happiness. You can give a great Bible lesson, but if they don't have the safety or the happiness, they're not even coming to your class. So as I look to see when we open and how we do it, there has to be that balance between the safety and the happiness. I can keep the kids safe and separated by 6 feet, but they're not going to be happy. Or I can make them happy, but then they're not going to be safe. So as soon as we can get to the phase where we can balance that, then that's when we'll think about opening up the nursery and the children's ministry.
We will be tiering it out like you guys down in San Antonio when we get there. We're not there yet in our state, but when we get there, we will tier it out. And we don't have those full answers right now as to how we'll tier it out, but we know as we keep listening to the state's mandates, but also just listening to what we're hearing from our health practitioners as well, we'll be figuring that out. But by and large, we have decided that we recognize that really children's ministry is going to be one of the last things to come online at a full idea of ministry, which is why we're really trying to even now say, let's focus on discipleship, let's focus on family ministry, and try to be able to do that.
Good. Well, good. Thank you so much. We're reaching the top of the hour. There are a lot of questions here. Do want to say to all the attendees, there are a number of questions as far as, some of these, Sue, you had mentioned the backyard clubs and the Pray For Me and things like that. We'll be sending out information following this later this evening. So you'll have some of that material. And again, any of the panelists that have anything, send to me. Any of the attendees, if you have anything you have found helpful, you have my email address, chrisvogel@ngpastors.com or cvogel@pcanet.org. But you've gotten the emails from me on this. Send it to me, and I'll add it to the packet. And because again, it's not doing everything, but it is figuring out what is the right thing in your context to be able to do. I do want to share just one of the things that will be going out is out of the way. This comes from Lifeway, and you can kind of get a sense of what's available there. It's a 17-page document that's very helpful. Also, next week we'll be continuing this kind of conversation, but dealing with youth and family. So there are going to be some similarities, but a lot of differences because we're dealing with a whole different demographic, if you will. And then also from week to week, every Thursday at 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central, we'll be talking about mercy ministry in light of COVID, the church compassion and COVID. We have a number of panelists for that, but we're getting some more. And then having 2 weeks on the regathering, the lessons learned of those that are still in the midst of lockdown, those who have started. And so that's what's coming up. Again, we are just so glad you've been able to participate. We'll get this information out to you. And if there's anything else we can do, please let us know. And with that, we appreciate your time. And if our panelists could just stay on for a minute, we'll wrap up.